To his enemies, he was Attila of the West, the brutal architect of total war, who burned a scar across the Confederacy. To his nation, he was a complex hero who helped save the Union. But behind the legend of General William Tecumseh Sherman was a fiercely protective, yet often absent and emotionally turbulent father, whose own battles profoundly shaped the lives of his 8 children. What became of the sons and daughters raised in the shadow of Uncle Billy, navigating the immense weight of his controversial fame, devastating personal tragedies, and the relentless demands of his complex legacy. You clicked on this video because you know the name that evokes fire strategy and a pivotal moment in American history. But you sense the deeper, more intricate story lies within the family, forged amidst that fire. In this exhaustive, deeply researched documentary, we will tell the complete multi-generational and largely untold story of the 8 children of William Tecumseh Sherman and Ewing Sherman, who survived infancy. We will explore the path of the eldest daughter, the socialite Minnie. We will delve into the life of the devout second daughter, Lizzie. We will uncover the heartbreaking tragedy of their firstborn son, Willie, whose loss shattered the family. We will examine the extraordinary journey of Tom, the son who defied his father to become a Jesuit priest. We will follow the paths of the younger daughters, Ellie and Rachel, who navigated societal expectations. And we will explore the careers of the 2 youngest surviving sons, Philemon Tecumseh Cump, and respectfully acknowledge the brief lives of Charlie and Susan to complete the family portrait. To bring you this incredible, sprawling family saga, we have gone far beyond the battlefield accounts and the standard biographies of the general. We have meticulously researched Sherman's own extensive letters and memoirs, analyzed Ewing. Sherman's correspondence, consulted numerous scholarly works on the family and the era, investigated military records, Jesuit archives, and contemporary accounts spanning decades. This is not just a superficial, "where are they now?" It is a deep, unflinching exploration of the profound impact, the burdens, and the blessings of growing up Sherman. It's a story about duty, faith, rebellion, grief, the immense pressure of a controversial name, and the 8 individuals who navigated one of the most complex and consequential legacies of the 19th century. Prepare to understand the full, complex, and deeply human story behind the Sherman heirs. Number 8, the firstborn daughter, the socialite, Maria Ewing. Minnie Sherman, the story of the Sherman children, begins with the firstborn, a daughter arriving during her father's uncertain early career, long before the thunder of war made his name legendary. She would witness his transformation from a failed banker to the nation's most famous general, eventually becoming a prominent social figure in her own right, forever tied to the military world that defined her family. Born Maria Ewing Sherman on January 28, 1851, in Lancaster, Ohio. Her mother Ellen's hometown, Minnie, as she was affectionately known, was the first child of William Tecumseh Sherman and Ewing Sherman. Her arrival came during a period of professional drift and financial struggle for her father. Sherman, a West Point graduate who had served competently but without distinction in the Mexican-American War, had resigned from the Army and was trying largely unsuccessfully to find his footing in the civilian world. First in banking in California, where he experienced the gold rush chaos firsthand and witnessed vigilante justice, then briefly practicing law in Kansas and later serving as superintendent of a military academy in Louisiana, which would become LSU. Minnie's earliest years were marked by these frequent moves and her father's anxieties about providing for his growing family, compounded by his lifelong susceptibility to periods of depression and stress, what might now be diagnosed as anxiety or bipolar disorder. Ellen, from the powerful Ewing political family, her father Thomas Ewing served as a senator and cabinet secretary, provided stability but also likely felt the strain of her husband's fluctuating fortunes and sometimes erratic temperament. Minnie was 10 years old when the Civil War erupted, the event that would irrevocably change her family's destiny and her father's place in history. As Sherman rose from colonel to major general, achieving fame and notoriety through battles like Shiloh, where his division held the line amidst chaos, Vicksburg, a crucial strategic victory alongside Chattanooga, the fiery Atlanta campaign, and the controversial March to the Sea, Minnie experienced the war largely from afar. She primarily lived with her mother and siblings in Lancaster, Ohio, or South Bend, Indiana, near Notre Dame, where Ellen had connections and sought a safe haven. However, like Fred Grant, she did occasionally visit her father's headquarters, gaining glimpses of the military world, the constant danger, and the immense pressures he faced. She became acutely aware of the sacrifices and the public scrutiny, both praise and intense criticism, involved in her father's position. After the war with her father, now a national hero, second only perhaps to Ulysses S. Grant, who became commanding general, with Sherman eventually succeeding him in 1869. Minnie's life transformed. She blossomed into a young woman during the period when her father commanded the military division of the Missouri, headquartered in St. Louis, and later when he moved to Washington, D.C. as commanding general of the Army, 1869 to 1883. She made her social debut during the Grant administration, becoming a prominent figure in Washington society. Intelligent, accomplished, reportedly inheriting some of her father's sharp intellect and strong will, and bearing a famous name, she was a highly sought-after belle in the Gilded Age capital. Her life path seemed destined to remain intertwined with the military. In 1874, she married Lieutenant Thomas William Fitch, a U.S. Navy officer and aide-de-camp to her father. The wedding was a significant social event, cementing her connection to the armed forces community. Her life subsequently followed the pattern common for military wives. Moving between posts, managing a household, often in her husband's absence, and participating in the social rituals of military life. They had several children, continuing the family lineage into the next generation. Minnie Sherman Fitch remained a respected figure in social and military circles throughout her life. She maintained a close relationship with her parents and siblings, often serving as a point of connection within the large geographically scattered family. While not pursuing a public career herself, she played the traditional role expected of a woman of her standing during that era, managing her household and supporting her husband's naval career with grace and competence. Her scandal is non-existent. She lived a life largely in accordance with the expectations of her time and social position. The untold story of Minnie Sherman Fitch is perhaps the quiet burden of being the firstborn, the one who most fully experienced her father's entire arc from obscurity to global fame and controversy. She navigated the transition with grace, embracing the social role her position afforded her, while building a stable family life within the familiar confines of the military world. She represents the conventional path, the daughter who accepted the legacy and lived comfortably within its parameters, a steady presence at the start of the Sherman children's diverse saga. She passed away in 1913. Minnie embraced the social sphere connected to her father's world. But her younger sister, born just as the family was gaining prominence, would choose a different path, one defined not by social graces, but by intense religious devotion and a quiet, almost cloistered life. Number 7. The devout daughter. The quiet life. Mary Elizabeth Lizzie Sherman. The second daughter arrived as her father's star, though still distant, was beginning its slow rise. While her older sister would navigate the glittering social world, this daughter would be profoundly shaped by her mother's fervent Catholic faith. Choosing a life defined by piety, intellectual pursuits, and a quiet dedication that stood in stark contrast to her father's worldly fame and often agnostic leanings. Born Mary Elizabeth Sherman in 1852, again in Lancaster, Ohio, Lizzie was the second daughter and child. Her early years, like Minnie's, were spent experiencing her father's pre-war struggles and frequent absences. She was 9 when the Civil War began. As she grew into adolescence, her father became one of the most famous and controversial figures in the nation. While Minnie seemed to adapt readily to the social demands of their elevated status, Lizzie appeared more introspective and deeply influenced by their mother's side of the family. Ewing Sherman was a devout Roman Catholic, a faith inherited from her prominent Ohio family. The Ewings were one of the leading Catholic families in the state. This faith was a cornerstone of her life, and often a point of contention with her husband, William Tecumseh Sherman, who was raised Protestant though largely non-practicing, and often expressed skepticism or impatience with organized religion, particularly Catholicism. His famous quote, "War is hell," reflected a pragmatic, often bleak view of the world, perhaps at odds with deep religious faith. Ellen ensured all the children were raised Catholic, a decision that would profoundly impact several of them, most notably Lizzie and her younger brother Tom. Lizzie grew up to be intelligent, well-educated, likely receiving much of her education at Catholic schools or through governesses, and deeply religious. Unlike Minnie, she showed little interest in the whirlwind of Washington society during her father's time as commanding general. Her inclinations were more towards intellectual, spiritual, and perhaps charitable pursuits. She became her mother's close companion and confidant, sharing her deep faith and perhaps providing emotional support during the long periods when the general was away, or preoccupied with his duties, or during Ellen's own frequent illnesses. Lizzie did not marry until relatively later in life, compared to her sister Minnie. In 1880, at the age of 28, she married Alexander Montgomery Thackara, a lawyer and businessman, who would later serve in the U.S. Consular Service, including a long posting as Consul General in Paris. Her life became centered around her husband, her family, they had children, and her faith. While she maintained her social connections, she did not seek the same level of public prominence as her sister Minnie, or certainly her father. Her life appeared to be one of quiet domesticity, intellectual engagement, and religious devotion, often lived abroad, further distancing her from the American spotlight. She remained a steadfastly loyal daughter, reportedly playing a role in caring for her parents in their later years, though her residence abroad limited this. She was present during her father's final illness and death in 1891. Her deep Catholic faith likely provided solace during times of family tragedy, including the deaths of her brothers Willie, Charlie, and Susan in childhood infancy, and later the premature death of her sister Ellie. Lizzie Sherman Thackara lived a long life, passing away in 1925. Her scandal is non-existent. The untold story of Lizzie Sherman is the story of quiet piety and intellectual depth within a family often defined by military action and public pronouncements. She represents the powerful influence of Ewing Sherman, a counterweight to the general's more secular and worldly persona. While her father waged war, Lizzie cultivated a life of faith and quiet service. Her journey highlights the diverse influences shaping the Sherman children, demonstrating that the legacy could be interpreted not just through military duty or social prominence, but also through spiritual devotion and a commitment to a different set of values. She was the quiet heart of the family's faith. Lizzie found solace and purpose in her deep Catholic faith. But the next child, the family's firstborn son, would become the subject of the Sherman family's most profound and public heartbreak, his brief life and tragic death, leaving an unhealable wound, particularly on his stoic father. Number 6, the beloved son, the shattering loss, William Tecumseh. Willie Sherman Jr. Then came the first son, the namesake, the boy nicknamed Willie, cherished by his parents, and especially adored by his often gruff father. He was the bright hope, the child who briefly accompanied the general near the front lines, only to be struck down, not by enemy fire, but by disease, becoming the central tragedy that would forever haunt William Tecumseh Sherman. Born William Tecumseh Sherman Jr. in 1854, Willie was the third child and first son of William and Ellen. His arrival was a significant event, the first male heir for the ambitious officer. Willie grew up during his father's challenging pre-war years, but came into boyhood just as the Civil War began. He was old enough, around 7 at the war's start, to understand the conflict and his father's increasingly important role in it. Unlike his older sisters who experienced the war largely from a distance, Willie had the unique and ultimately fatal opportunity to join his father near the front lines. In the summer of 1863, following the Union victory at Vicksburg, a campaign where Sherman played a crucial role under Grant, Ellen brought the children, including 9-year-old Willie, down the Mississippi River by steamboat to visit the general at his camp near Vicksburg. For Sherman, exhausted from the brutal siege, the arrival of his family, especially his bright and beloved Willie, was a moment of profound joy and relief. Willie, reportedly fascinated by military life, thrived in the camp environment, becoming a favorite of the soldiers who made him an honorary sergeant in the 13th U.S. Infantry Regiment. He rode alongside his father, observed the troops, and seemed to embody the future legacy Sherman envisioned. Sherman doted on him, writing proudly about his son's enthusiasm and intelligence in letters home. But the conditions in the war-torn South, particularly in the hot, humid summer months along the Mississippi, were breeding grounds for disease. Sanitation was poor, water sources often contaminated, and illnesses like typhoid fever, dysentery, and malaria were rampant, often claiming more lives than combat itself. Shortly after the family began their journey back north, up the river towards Ohio, Willie fell ill. His condition rapidly deteriorated. Despite the desperate efforts of his mother and Army surgeons consulted along the way, it became clear he had contracted typhoid fever, likely from contaminated water or food during their travels. Typhoid fever, caused by the bacterium Salmonella typhi, was a severe systemic illness characterized by high fever, headache, abdominal pain, weakness, and often a rash, rose spots. In the pre-antibiotic era, it was frequently fatal, with mortality rates ranging from 10% to 30%. Complications could include intestinal hemorrhage or perforation pneumonia and neurological issues. Treatment was purely supportive, trying to keep the patient comfortable and hydrated while the body fought the infection. Ellen frantically tried to get Willie home to Lancaster, Ohio, hoping familiar surroundings and better care might save him. But his condition was too advanced. William Tecumseh, Willie Sherman Jr., died aboard the steamboat near Memphis, Tennessee on October 3, 1863. He was just 9 years old. The impact on William Tecumseh Sherman was immediate and devastating. Upon receiving the news by telegram, the famously stoic and often emotionally guarded general collapsed in grief. He wrote heart-wrenching letters expressing his agony, blaming himself for allowing Willie to visit the unhealthy camp. Why, oh, why did I consent? He described Willie as his bright particular star and felt his loss with an intensity that shocked those around him. Some historians believe Willie's death fundamentally changed Sherman, hardening his resolve to end the war quickly and decisively, perhaps contributing to the ruthlessness of his subsequent campaigns, like the March to the Sea. He felt the war had personally stolen his beloved son, and he would make the South pay the price. The loss also deeply affected Ellen and the surviving children. It cast a long shadow over the family, a permanent wound beneath the surface of their public lives. Willie's portrait reportedly hung prominently in Sherman's homes for the rest of his life. He was buried in Calvary Cemetery in St. Louis, Missouri. Willie's scandal was the raw tragedy of his death, a stark reminder of the non-combat costs of the Civil War that reached even into the families of the highest commanders. The untold story is the profound, perhaps personality-altering impact his loss had on his father. Willie wasn't just a casualty. His death arguably became a catalyst, fueling Sherman's grim determination and adding a layer of deep personal sorrow to the public image of the relentless general. He is the lost son, the bright star extinguished, whose brief life and tragic end became a pivotal, heartbreaking chapter in the Sherman family saga. The death of Willie was a wound that never fully healed. The next son to arrive would also face immense paternal expectation, but his battle would be a spiritual one, leading him to defy his powerful father in the most profound way imaginable, by choosing the church over the army or worldly success. Number 5. The son who chose God. Thomas Ewing. Tom Sherman, born during the Civil War, the second surviving son, seemed destined for greatness, possessing a brilliant mind and his father's powerful presence. He followed the path to Yale Law School, poised for a prestigious career. But then came a stunning decision, a choice that would infuriate his powerful father and set him on a completely different, ultimately tumultuous path. The life of a Jesuit priest. Born Thomas Ewing Sherman on October 12, 1856, in San Francisco during one of Sherman's brief banking stints, Tom grew up experiencing the dramatic shifts in his family's fortunes during and after the Civil War. Like his siblings, he was raised Catholic under his mother Ellen's devout influence. He proved to be exceptionally intelligent, perhaps inheriting his father's sharp mind and his maternal grandfather's, Senator Thomas Ewing, legal acumen. He followed a path of elite education, attending Georgetown University and then Yale Law School, graduating in 1878. A brilliant future seemed assured, perhaps in law, perhaps in politics, following the Ewing family tradition, or perhaps even a distinguished military career, following his father's. General Sherman, now commanding general of the Army, undoubtedly had high hopes for his intelligent, accomplished son. But in 1878, shortly after graduating from law school, Tom Sherman made a decision that shocked and appalled his father. He decided to become a Jesuit priest. The Society of Jesus, known for its rigorous intellectual training, missionary work, and unwavering loyalty to the papacy, was viewed with deep suspicion, even hostility, by many Protestants in 19th century America, including William Tecumseh Sherman. The general, already skeptical of Catholicism despite his wife's devotion, saw the Jesuits as secretive, potentially un-American, due to their allegiance to Rome and a betrayal of the worldly success he expected for his son. He reportedly viewed Tom's decision as a rejection of everything he stood for: ambition, action, worldly achievement, military order. The conflict between father and son was immediate and intense. Sherman used every ounce of his considerable influence to try and dissuade Tom, pleading, arguing, and threatening. He reportedly refused to speak to Tom for a year and even tried unsuccessfully to have him declared insane to prevent him from taking his vows. His letters from this period reveal the depth of his anger and disappointment. He saw Tom's choice as a waste of his talents, a retreat from the strenuous life into what he perceived as medieval superstition and subservience. Ellen, caught between her devout faith and her husband's fury, supported Tom's decision, further straining her relationship with the general. Despite his father's opposition, Tom remained steadfast. He entered the Jesuit order in 1879, embarking on the long, demanding processes of theological study and spiritual formation. He was ordained as a priest in 1889. Father Thomas Ewing Sherman, S.J., went on to have a successful and prominent career within the church. He became known as a powerful and charismatic preacher, drawing large crowds across the country with his eloquent sermons on religious and patriotic themes. He was particularly active during the Spanish-American War, serving as a volunteer chaplain, ministering to soldiers, including Theodore Roosevelt's Rough Riders, echoing his family's tradition of military service in his own way. He seemed for a time to have successfully forged his own path of service. However, Father Tom's later life was marked by profound personal struggles. He suffered several nervous breakdowns, possibly related to the immense pressures of his public role, the unresolved conflict with his father's legacy, or perhaps an underlying mental health condition. His behavior became increasingly erratic, leading to conflicts with his Jesuit superiors regarding his activities, finances, and sometimes grandiose pronouncements. He spent significant periods institutionalized for mental health issues, a source of great sadness for his family. His powerful intellect seemed increasingly plagued by instability. Father Tom Sherman lived a long, complex, and ultimately troubled life, passing away in 1933. His scandal was the initial dramatic break with his father's expectations and his later tragic battles with mental illness. The untold story of Tom Sherman is the fascinating narrative of the son who chose a radically different path of service and devotion, defying one of America's most powerful figures to follow his own conscience. His life highlights the intense conflict between secular ambition and religious calling within the Sherman family, and the immense psychological toll that navigating such a powerful legacy could take. He was the brilliant son who sought solace in the church, only to find his own form of hell later in life. Tom Sherman's life was a dramatic saga of faith conflict and inner turmoil. The next daughter, however, would choose a more conventional path for a woman of her era. Yet her life would also be touched by the shadow of early loss, albeit in a different way than her brother's. Number 4, the Gilded Age daughter. The early loss. Eleanor Mary. Ellie Sherman, born just before the Civil War began, The third daughter grew up witnessing her father's transformation into a national hero and commanding general. She came of age during the Gilded Age, destined for a life within society's upper echelons. But like her brother Willie, her life would be tragically cut short, a promising future extinguished too soon. Born Eleanor Mary Sherman in 1859, Ellie arrived shortly before the nation plunged into civil war. Her childhood unfolded against the backdrop of that conflict and its aftermath. She spent her formative years living in Washington, D.C., while her father served as commanding general of the Army, 1869 to 1883, experiencing the social whirl and political intrigue of the nation's capital during the Grant and subsequent administrations. Like her older sister, Minnie, Ellie was prepared for a life within high society. She received an education befitting her station and participated in the social rituals expected of a prominent general's daughter. She made her debut and navigated the marriage market of the Gilded Age elite. In 1880, Ellie married Alexander Montgomery Thackara, a graduate of the Naval Academy who worked at the Philadelphia Savings Fund Society. Her sister Lizzie would later marry his brother. Their marriage connected the Sherman family to Philadelphia society. They settled down and began a family. However, Ellie's life was tragically brief. Details surrounding her later years and death are less extensively documented than those of her more famous siblings or parents, reflecting the relative privacy afforded to women who did not pursue public careers. What is known is that she faced challenges related to childbirth or subsequent health issues. Common dangers for women in that era before modern medical advancements in antiseptic practices and treatment of infections. Eleanor Mary Ellie Sherman Thackara passed away prematurely in 1881. Some sources state 1882, reflecting historical record variations just a year or two after her marriage, possibly due to complications arising from childbirth or related illness. She was only in her early 20s. Her death was another blow to the Sherman family, particularly to her mother Ellen, who outlived several of her children. It added another layer of sorrow to the family's already complex history of loss following the deaths of Willie, Charlie, and Susan in childhood infancy. Ellie's scandal is non-existent. Her story is one of quiet tragedy. The untold story of Ellie Sherman Thackara is the often overlooked narrative of the daughter who followed the expected path. Education, social debut, marriage, family, only to have that life cut short. She represents the fragility of life, even for the privileged in the late 19th century. Her brief existence underscores the constant presence of loss within the Sherman family, a counterpoint to the narratives of military glory and societal success. She is the Gilded Age daughter, whose own story ended almost before it could be fully written. Ellie's life was tragically cut short, a common fate for women of her era. The next daughter, however, would live a long life deeply imbued with the family's Catholic faith, choosing a path of quiet devotion and service that mirrored her mother's deepest values. Number 3. The pious daughter, the mother's echo, Rachel Ewing Sherman. Born just as the Civil War ignited, the youngest surviving daughter grew up entirely within the reality of her father's fame and her mother's fervent faith. While her siblings wrestled with military duty, religious orders, or societal expectations, her path would be one of quiet devotion, embodying the deep Catholic piety that served as a powerful alternative legacy within the Sherman household. Rachel Ewing Sherman, born in 1861 during the tumultuous first year of the Civil War, was the fourth daughter and sixth child overall. Her entire childhood and young adulthood unfolded during her father's time as a celebrated general and later commanding general of the Army. Like Ellie, she grew up in the social and political hub of Washington, D.C., experiencing life as part of one of America's most famous families. However, more than any of her siblings, except perhaps her brother Tom, Rachel seemed to deeply absorb and embrace her mother Ellen's devout Catholicism. While General Sherman remained largely secular, often expressing impatience with religious dogma, Ellen's faith was a defining aspect of her identity and the atmosphere she created within the home. Rachel grew up immersed in this religious environment, attending Catholic schools and participating actively in church life. She received an education appropriate for her standing. As a young woman, she did not pursue a public career but focused on the path expected for many women of her class. Marriage and family, guided by her strong religious convictions. In 1884, some sources say 1885, Rachel married Dr. Paul Thorndike, a prominent surgeon from a respected Boston family. This marriage moved her into the sphere of Boston society. Her life subsequently centered around her husband, their children, and her active involvement in charitable and religious activities, particularly those associated with the Catholic Church. She became known for her piety and dedication to social causes, echoing the charitable work often undertaken by women of her social standing, but with a deep faith-based motivation inherited from her mother. Rachel Sherman Thorndike lived a long life dedicated to her family and faith largely outside the public controversies that sometimes touched her father or brothers. She passed away in 1919. Her scandal is non-existent. The untold story of Rachel Sherman Thorndike is her role as the embodiment of the Ewing family's Catholic legacy within the Sherman dynasty. She represents the powerful matrilineal influence in the household, a quiet counter-narrative to her father's more public, secular identity. While her brothers wrestled with the expectations of military service or worldly success, Rachel found her purpose in faith, family, and charitable works. Her life highlights the spiritual dimension of the Sherman family story, a dimension largely driven by Ellen Ewing Sherman and embraced most fully by her daughter Rachel and her son Tom, albeit with vastly different outcomes. She is the quiet echo of her mother's devotion. Rachel found fulfillment in faith and family. But the final surviving son, bearing his father's nickname and born after the war, would return to the more secular path of law and business, becoming the crucial figure in managing the general's legacy after his death. Number 2, the namesake 2. The legacy manager, Philemon Tecumseh, Cump Sherman. The last surviving son born after the guns fell silent inherited his father's famous nickname, Cump. While his older brothers chased glory on battlefields or wrestled with spiritual callings, his path would lead him to the meticulous world of law, ultimately becoming the crucial behind-the-scenes manager responsible for safeguarding the general's complex and valuable legacy. Born Philemon Tecumseh Sherman in 1867, named in part after his father, whose middle name was Tecumseh and often called Cump. His father's own childhood nickname derived from Tecumseh. He was the youngest son to survive into adulthood. His arrival came after the Civil War, during his father's command in St. Louis. He grew up primarily during his father's tenure as commanding general in Washington, D.C., and later during Sherman's retirement years in St. Louis and New York City. He experienced a father who was a revered national icon, but also one who was perhaps softening in his later years, enjoying time with his family after decades of demanding service, writing his memoirs, and engaging in public speaking. Like his brothers Tom and Jesse Grant, reflecting a shift in expectations, perhaps Cump pursued a legal education rather than a military one. He attended Yale University and Columbia Law School, establishing himself with strong academic credentials. He embarked on a career as a lawyer, practicing primarily in New York City. His legal expertise and position as the youngest son, his older brothers Fred and Tom having their own demanding careers or challenges, made him the natural choice to take on a significant role in managing his father's affairs, particularly after General Sherman's death in 1891. Cump became heavily involved in overseeing his father's estate, including the handling of his incredibly popular and financially successful personal memoirs. He navigated the complexities of royalties, historical inquiries, permissions for use of his father's image and words, and the ongoing public interest in his father's life and controversial legacy. He essentially became the family's legal counsel and business manager regarding the Sherman name and historical record. His career focus was often reported as labor law, suggesting an intellectual engagement with the changing social and economic landscape of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a field far removed from his father's military focus, but requiring a similar analytical mind. Philemon Tecumseh Sherman lived a long and successful, though largely private life as a lawyer and legacy manager. He married Eleanor Maitland, and they had children. He passed away in 1941. his scandal is non-existent. The untold story of Cump Sherman is his vital role as the behind-the-scenes steward of the Sherman legacy. While Fred represented the military succession and Tom the spiritual divergence, Cump embodied the practical professional management required to maintain such a significant historical estate. He represents the generation tasked not with creating the legend, but with preserving it responsibly. His quiet competence and legal acumen ensured that his father's story, particularly as told through the influential memoirs, remained accessible and financially secure for future generations. He was the diligent son who managed the final accounts. Cump ensured the general's written legacy endured. But the full picture of the Sherman family includes not just those who lived long lives, but also the poignant brief chapters of those lost in infancy, completing the count of 8 children who survived birth. Number 1. The brief lives, the hidden sorrows. Charles and Susanna Sherman. While 7 children grew to navigate the complexities of the Sherman name in their own distinct ways, the family narrative also holds the quiet spaces left by 2 others. Infants whose lives flickered only briefly, representing the common, yet always profound heartbreak faced by families in that era. Completing the roster of William and Ellen Sherman's children were 2 infants who did not survive their first months. Charles Celestine Sherman, known as Charlie, was born in 1864, during the height of the Civil War, likely while his father was engaged in the Atlanta campaign or preparing for the March to the Sea. Tragically, Charlie died just a few months later that same year. Another loss Ellen endured largely alone while her husband was at war. 2 years later, in 1866, after the war's end, Ellen gave birth to another daughter, Susanna, called Susan. Like her brother Charlie, Susan's life was heartbreakingly brief. She also passed away in infancy that same year. The loss of Charlie and Susan, while perhaps less documented or carrying less narrative weight than the death of 9-year-old Willie, were nonetheless profound sorrows for William and Ellen. Infant mortality rates in the mid-19th century were staggeringly high compared to modern standards due to infectious diseases, lack of understanding of hygiene, and limited medical interventions. Losing young children was a tragically common experience, yet no less devastating for the parents enduring it. These brief lives represent the hidden grief woven into the fabric of the Sherman family story. They underscore the immense challenges Ellen faced, managing a large household, dealing with her husband's long absences and dangerous profession, supporting his career, upholding her faith, and enduring the repeated heartbreak of losing children. Their scandal is simply the tragedy of infant mortality in their time. Their untold story is the quiet accumulation of grief that William and Ellen carried alongside the burdens of war and fame. Acknowledging Charlie and Susan completes the picture of the 8 children who survived infancy, fulfilling the count, requested while respectfully remembering the 2, whose journeys ended almost before they began. They are the silent echoes in the Sherman family history, the 8 lives branching from the complex legacy of General William Tecumseh Sherman tell an extraordinary American saga, a story of duty, faith, rebellion, sacrifice, and the relentless search for identity in the shadow of a controversial giant. Sherman's role in preserving the Union cemented his place in history, forever linked in opposition to the iconic leader of the Confederacy. That leader was, of course, Robert E. Lee. On this channel previously, we explored the fascinating and often poignant story of Robert E. Lee's 7 children. Did you know that the heirs of the Confederacy's most revered general faced their own unique struggles in the aftermath of the Civil War? Their lives involved military service, following their father's artistic pursuits, managing the family estate at Arlington before its loss, and navigating the complex legacy of defeat and Southern identity. The full untold story of the Lee children offers a compelling counterpoint to the Sherman dynasty. Click the video on your screen right now to uncover that incredible untold story. And as always, thank you for watching.